This album is a particularly important album for me. I remember when my brother bought the album back in the mid 90s when we first heard about Weezer. I practically learnt how to play bass from this record. My son, who's a similar age to what I was when the Blue Album first came out, has now got the album. This is his favourite album, so he's got this on LP. So it was brilliant to hear that there was a Super Deluxe Edition to come out to commemorate the 30th anniversary. So we're going to be taking a look at the album itself. It's also the bits you get from this album. I think that there's a lot of Weezer fans who are going to be pleasantly surprised around what they find out around this particular edition. But Al, good morning to you. Now, I know that you're not necessarily as much of a fan of this album as I certainly am. This is like a top 10 album for me. But mate, take us through. What were your thoughts when you brought out this album again?
Yeah, good morning, mate. Wow, 30 years, hey? I was only 12 at the time, and you would have been early 20s, I guess. But look, I mean, this is a great opportunity to reflect on the album that really did help shape the 90s, mate. 1994 in particular, just before the release of this album, it's pretty full on. I mean, you had Kurt Cobain being found dead after shooting himself. You had Definitely Maybe being released. I mean, this was a year of music, mate. So to hear that the 30-year anniversary has come and gone, and they've released an absolute treasure trove of bonuses. There's lots to talk about, mate. But for me, the song Buddy Holly really sums up this album. When I first heard this song, and probably more importantly saw the film clip, I absolutely loved it, mate, from start to finish. And listening to the album again a while on, it's been a while since I've actually listened to it, mate. It's absolutely fantastic, start to finish. Tell me, what does this album mean to you?
It means everything. So there's just so many songs off this album that could have been hits that weren't released. I mean, Buddy Holly, you've got to remember, it was part of the Windows 95 CD that you got, so it's obviously something we take for granted at the moment. But back in the 90s, it was really cool to see that you could get the Windows 95 install CD and you could play the Buddy Holly music video as part of that. That was awesome seeing that for the first time. But I think it was a really interesting time for music. As you said, Nirvana, Pearl Jam was really a response to a lot of the hair metal in a lot of ways. Yeah. Weezer brought this in, so that sort of the DIY ethos of a lot of those bands, but they laid on a lot of the late 70s arena rock type of stylings, but also like things like the Beach Boys, like harmonies that you're hearing in the 60s, probably hadn't heard since the 60s. They had the balls to actually put that on a record, and it came up pretty good. And I think that you think about a lot of bands and a lot of albums that came after this record, you hear it. You hear that like there's a lot of records that are trying these things on after Weezer did it way back in the mid-90s.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit more about that, actually? Because that was the first question I asked myself. When I played this album back again, it reminded me of a few years later, 1996, when the band Nada Surf released their first album with the song Popular. It kind of paved the way for these short, sharp punk songs that also had a tune to it as well. And I think 30 years later, bands like Nada Surf and Weezer in particular are still around and still playing arenas and shows because of that. I mean, I somewhere quoted that they were inspired by the Pixies with the soft verse, loud chorus, and that was really their kind of bread and butter. Do you think that's a fair thing to say?
Oh, 100%. And for me, you can see that in hearing the Super Deluxe parts of it, and we're going to get to that in a moment, that he had the vision all along around this. Now, Rivers was a very much a hair metal type of a guy. He loved playing metal guitar, but he obviously had other influences as well. But you could see that he had this idea, this persona that was really sort of suited to him, this sort of geek rock stuff that he was really made for. And I think that really came out in the album. And the album's sort of a joy to watch. It's not like undercooked in terms of maybe a lo-fi pop record. Like there is some guitar licks in it, and they love amping up things, but it's also got this softer side as well, which and a fun side as well. So it's always been a joy to listen to. So there's probably a couple of things to maybe cover off on. I think the first, and I'm really interested to hear people's comments about this. Al, I'm not sure if you've got any comments, but this has actually been remastered. Now, I'm not really hearing too much from the remaster compared to the original version. So I think that albums from the 90s tend to not need the remaster as much as the albums from the 60s and 70s. Let me know what you thought. I put it out. I've given it a couple of listens. Couldn't really hear anything. Al, I'm not sure if you heard anything particularly with Buddy Holly or not, but it didn't seem like there was too much difference there.
Yeah, no, I can't really comment on that, to be fair, mate. I haven't really sat down to listen to on the the full stereo setup where you can really kind of maybe tell the differences. So it'd be interesting to see whether people are noticing difference in particular songs and whether it's worth it.
Moving now to the super deluxe parts to it, and I spent a lot of time listening to it. I back in the 90s loved listening to Weezer B-sides. So there was websites like the Rebel Weezer Alliance, so these 90s websites where they were fan sites, and you could go in and you could basically grab an MP3 of a B-side. I don't recall listening to a lot of the B-sides that were what were included here, but basically what you do get is firstly some recordings from about early 1995, so January 1995 from memory, where effectively the BBC in-studio types of recording. So this is about 6 months after the album was released. And I've got to say that is far, far, far more interesting for me to listen to than the actual albums themselves. You've got a band who've been basically around for 2.5 years, probably 3 years by this point, and you could just tell that there is just tons of chemistry within the band, and it's really coming out in the songs. Now, once you get that and you go through, that's sort of disc 1, you go to disc 2 and disc 3. Now, disc 2 is effectively demos. So one of the probably the more important part of the demo is the kitchen tape demos, which is almost like an album that was recorded to get Weezer a record deal. So a lot of the songs that ended up on the Blue Album are on this demo tape. I'm sure that people have listened to the bootlegs and whatnot and are probably very familiar with the kitchen tape demos. Funny enough, I haven't really come across it, but there's a lot of songs that I've not really listened to before on that were intriguing to listen to. And of the songs that did make it to the album, you can definitely hear what the whole idea and the whole vision was for the album. You can tell in particular that they had, and this came out several times in several recordings, the world has turned and left me here. I know that's on the album now, and that's probably one of my more favourite tunes, but I think this was one of the original songs that the guys were wanting to, I guess, build up as a single, and you can sort of tell that I think they were going to put all their bets on that particular song. As it turned out, Buddy Holly was probably a much more commercially successful tune, and it was always going to be their hit.
So, just on that, so a question I've got for you now that you've gone through all the B-sides, mate, is there anything that should have made the album that didn't? I mean, obviously these guys had a fair bit of control of what went on the album, the track listing and so forth, but do you think that something could have snuck on this record that should have, or is it perfect as is?
It's a good question. So they really went for 10 tracks on this album. Jamie was the song that I really loved and I've known about for a long time. So Jamie is on the third disc, and I think it's a live recording, which is interesting. It sounds very much like the version that came out on the Geffen Rarities album. So if anyone knows about this 90s Geffen Rarities album, had a number of Geffen acts and B-sides that was put on this compilation hour. So Urge Overkill was on, Weezer was on, Jamie was on this Rarities album. Now, so that song in particular, I felt that it could have been a single, and really, I've always loved that tune. I'm really glad that it's been incorporated into this one. But yeah, there's probably another few. I mean, Lullabies of Wayne, I think, was another one that was on there. I've also liked Thief, You've Taken All That Was Me. That was a really cool one as well. So yeah, I think the answer is yeah. They could have actually put quite a number of different tracks onto the album. I think as it stood, I don't think there's really a place for it, because all 10 songs that were on the album were all killer. So Al, probably the last thing to mention was that they had, this is the third disc. So the second disc is very much demos. The third disc were live recordings. So you do get a sense that there's a dusty bar, or that where there's not many people listening to them play, and they're really sort of lumping up and playing their tunes for the first time in front of prospective fans. That was really cool to listen to. You're kind of hearing the band forming and getting to where they ended up getting to when you heard them live in those 1995 recordings. So it's kind of got a good, I guess, arc to it in terms of the final product and how they got to where they got to.
And I think from what you're saying and from what I've read and reviews, is this is absolutely definitely worth a re-release and a remastering for the fans on the 30th anniversary. Some bands out there are just putting out, anniversary albums just for the sake of it, but this sounds like it's been really well thought out, real well planned, and quite good value for money if you do invest some money into the whole vinyl and the CD set, or whether you're just streaming from your favourite streaming service. So I think it's absolutely worthwhile, mate. You seem pretty happy, mate. Is there any final words you'd like to say?
Not really, other than I'd be keen to see if anyone has any additional thoughts on this particular record and the Super Deluxe Edition. So let us know in the comments. Let us know what you think.